arms. It appeared to be crystalline sheets of material. As soon as they would brush some off, more seemed to come out of their skin. There was a faint odor in the air, acrid, and I thought it might be ammonia. I recall telling Bud that this was how they relieved themselves. Watching it happen, I couldn't think of anything else it could be. This is what disgusted me. From the document, quote, "There are a lot of pores on the skin crossing from the epidermis to a gland in the hypodermis. These glands and pores are the terminal part of the excretory sudoriferous system, which could explain the previously mentioned smell," end quote. The document reports that a strong smell of burnt hair and ammonia is emitted when the gray film that covers their skin is removed. The film is described as a biosynthetic covering that is not protective against heat, but does prevent the passage of liquids. This would also explain why nobody reports the ammonia smell or witnesses the removal of waste that I observed. This material is kept against the body when the covering is on. As I recall, the only smell that I noticed while I was inside their place with them on December the 26th, 1985, was a mild odor of cinnamon. Therefore, they were wearing something over their skin at that time. The author of the document assumes that the covering is protective, but I don't think that is necessarily the case. Its more important purpose is probably to contain the excretory material. If so, then this supports the theory that these are designed creatures, not an outcome of evolutionary biology. The document notes that the skin beneath the covering is very white and the texture is very regular without any hair. I only saw them wiping the crystalline material off their arms, not their whole bodies, which would suggest that they had removed sleeves and the rest of the bodies were still inside the covering. I don't remember noticing the color of the skin on the arms. One I did observe on intimate terms about a year later, an event described in Supernatural, pages 141 to 142, seemed to me to have pale but not white skin. I can recall at one point thinking that she almost looked like a human woman with a very strange face. Unlike the grays I had seen, she had human-looking legs. There was also in her face a sort of desperation. She wanted to be appreciated, but she was very ugly, it seemed to me. When I so much as thought how ugly she was, she would turn her face away as if slapped, and I would hear her anguished scream in my mind. It left me wondering, of course, whether or not they have created instances of themselves that contain some elements of us, and that this is what I was dealing with when I was abducted. The complex insecurities caused by this coalesced into the story Pain, which is about a powerful feminine presence that cleanses a man's soul with a sort of healing fire. The story was written as the traumatic amnesia I had experienced due to the abduction was lifting, and I was in the process of recalling what had happened to me. In fact, in the middle of the story, there began to be references to UFO material, the first such in my entire body of work. This entity, I want to say simply woman, also differed from the ones I described in the document in that she had genitals. She was therefore capable of reproduction and possibly more purely biological than they appear to have been. When we discuss their brains, though, the question of the degree of independence of thought that the ones under biological study represented will be explored more fully. The ones that were autopsied seemed to me to be less independently functional than this woman. Maybe they were not really independent entities, possibly some sort of symbiotic extension of a creature like her that functions very differently than we do in our world, but not, I would think, from the way that we might in the future. It's not hard to see that we might end up creating robotic extensions of ourselves that can function independently even as they are under our overall control, linked to us in some way. There will be robots controlled by artificial intelligence in our world very soon, probably within a few years of the publication of this book. They will not be designed to biology, not yet, but that can certainly happen. Even given a technological confluence like this, it must always be remembered that we are not dealing here with a mind that works like ours. As can be seen in the communion letters, their logic is not our logic, and their problem-solving choices are often, by our standards, wildly asymmetrical. It is therefore not surprising that they have chosen to solve the problem of how to engage with us by creating a semi-artificial version of themselves that can be deployed into dangerous situations and is designed to carry out specific tasks. We do see in our own environment many species that have evolved exquisitely detailed purpose-specific variants. Leafcutter ants, as an example, have 7 different functional variants in the same species. These different variants also have different brain structures. They are hardwired to task, in other words. It's worth noticing that the soldier ants have the largest brains and eyes, probably to enable them as much flexibility as possible. So maybe the complex, independent creature that managed my abduction and that spent time with me and my family and became intimate with me was farther up in their hierarchy than the ones that the Reddit document describes. The document also mentions something that I may have observed, which is the fact that the huge black eyes are actually coverings. Quote, like the skin, the eyes are covered with a semi-transparent biosynthetic film that offers the same environmental protection while providing protection against certain wavelengths and light intensity. When the film is removed, a more traditional eye is revealed. It's about 3 times larger than a human eye, and there are no eyelids. I cannot say for certain that I have seen this, but it seems very familiar. I can remember such eyes boring into me with great intensity. When I had the communion portrait painted, I had never seen one without the eye coverings. I would think that few, if any, people had, which is why I suppose that they wanted the covering and not the eye to be in the image. In the cover on the new edition of Communion, the eyes beneath the covering are subtly visible. On the cover Of this book, of course, the probable real I is rendered as precisely as I have managed to describe it to the artist. Although I did not know this at the time, I have come to understand that the portrait was intended to cause people they had contacted to realize that what they had thought was a strange dream that lingered in their minds was in fact in some way real. For this reason, when the image appeared, it caused a flood of response. Many thousands of those letters are now housed in the Archives of the Impossible at Rice University. This archive is the first extensive record of contact between mankind and these others. It puts on display the great complexity of contact and fights the popular illusion that it is a simple, repetitive process. In fact, it is the most complex collective experience humankind has ever had. I will now compare the anatomical features described in the document to the behaviors that I and other close encounter witnesses have observed and determine as best as possible from this what our visitors' physical capabilities and limitations are. The document describes the feet in this way, quote, "At first glance, the feet consist of just 2 digits, but necropsy soon determined that each toe was made of 2 fused digits. The medial toe is marginally longer than the distal toe. The feet are relatively longer and narrower than in a human. Their musculature, however, is vestigial." We would know that they had come around the house at night, especially in snow or when the soil was softened by rain, because they would leave holes that matched the stride of a smallish person moving at walking gait. I thought that this must mean that they had hooves like a goat, but feet as described above would leave similar marks if they walk on their toes. Because of another incident, I believe that this is exactly correct. We would sometimes hear their tapping footfalls on the front porch, and the motion-sensitive lights would turn on. This sound would have to have been made by something moving on hard toes, not the bottoms of soft feet. In addition to this, when they want to move fast, they just rise above the ground and can go very quickly. My son and I saw this happen early one morning at our cabin, a story which I will expand in the next chapter. As to how this is done, I'm not willing to speculate. As these appear to be, at least in part, designed and probably therefore manufactured creatures, it could be both technological and biological, and dependent on physics that we do not yet understand. As recently as October the 6th, 2024, I was with someone who witnessed this type of motion, although I did not see the being who sped past us while we were walking in a forest at night. Regarding the hands, the document says they have 4 digits but no nails, that there are circular fingerprints, presumably meaning that they are somewhat rounded. It also states that, quote, "Fingers are proportionally much longer than in humans. Unlike humans, finger musculature is entirely intrinsic to the hand. In other words, the muscles used to move the fingers are not in the forearms, but entirely located in the hands." This from Communion, page 189. The hands were very long and tapered when in repose, with 3 fingers and an opposable thumb. When pressed down, the hands became flat, suggesting that they were more pliable than our hands. On the fingers were short, dark nails of a more claw-like appearance than ours. I have never observed hands with no nails. The finger ends I have seen round only when they are pressed against a surface. I have observed the hands in function, and the supple movement of the fingers like snakes suggests exactly the sort of mobility that musculature, quote, "entirely intrinsic to the hand," would have. Here is a specific incidence of this. Our son had a boy up to the cabin at a time when the one I think of as the lady on the cover of Communion was coming around nightly. The boy had injured his mouth by putting his tongue in a light socket when he was younger and had a scar. Again and again during the night, she would come to my bedside and project an image into my mind of smoke pouring out of the side of her own mouth, then try to frighten me by suggesting that my son would be kidnapped if he took a cab over to the other boy's flat, which he did fairly frequently. Both boys were sleeping in the same room, and the guest bed was directly across from the door.